Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, back at the time of the autumn statement, the Chancellor told us he had built a strong economy. Britain's makers were on the march, and he found a whopping £27 billion to reverse the tax credit plans. And he was widely assumed then to be the next Tory leader. What a difference a few months makes. Now we're told the economy is still fragile and vulnerable to a dangerous cocktail of new threats, and £18 billion black hole has appeared in the public finances. Chancellor, welcome. Things have gone pretty badly wrong, haven't they?
Well, I think the world is a much more difficult and dangerous place. Indeed, my message in this budget is that the world is a more uncertain place than at any time since the financial crisis, and we need to act now so we don't pay later. That's why I need to find additional savings equivalent to 50p in every £100 the government spends by the end of the decade, because we've got to live within our means to stay secure, and that's the way we make Britain fit for the future.
So when people talk about an £18 billion black hole, that's pretty accurate.
Well, £18 billion is the sum of money that has been revised off our nominal GDP. In other words, that's a number out there last year because inflation was lower.
But it's a real number, isn't it?
Well, it's a real number in the sense that all around the world, in every Western country, and indeed in big emerging countries like China, Brazil, Russia, people are looking at economic prospects and thinking they're not as rosy as they were just a few months ago. But let's put this in context. Britain is still forecast to have the strongest growing economy of any of the major economies in the world. We've got a record number of people in work. So I would say this, 8 years ago when we had the financial crash, Britain was one of the worst prepared countries for what happened. This time, in uncertain times, Britain is one of the best prepared countries. So, of course, we're not immune to what's going on.
Well,
we're not immune, but that doesn't mean we can't take action to make sure we are well prepared.
But this is going to have to be a budget of further cuts.
Well, we are going to have to make further savings, equivalent, as I say, to 50p in every £100 the government spends by the end of the decade. But what is the alternative? To see this difficult situation emerging in the world economy, to look at our own economy and see it's not as productive as we would like, and to give up and say we're not going to do anything? Absolutely not. Yeah, I want to roll up our sleeves, make sure we are living within our means, making our country more productive, making sure our schools are better, our infrastructure is better, our taxes are more competitive. You know, this
so
is,
where are the cuts?
We are not powerless
so where are the
in the
cuts
face of these things.
Where are the cuts
Well,
going
look,
to come?
I think we can find those savings. It's not a huge amount in the scheme of things. And I think you can do it through looking, as we always do, where you get best value for money, through efficiency and so on.
Even more pain for the non-protected departmental budgets where people are already screaming protests across Tory England.
Well, I think we've set out a plan when it comes to public expenditure that enables us to invest in the public's priorities and our priorities, like the National Health Service, like science and education and infrastructure, and indeed in defence, while at the same time not spending more than the country can afford. And ultimately, the people who pay the price, if you spend more than you can afford, are the people in this country. Well, it's people living in this country, you know, who don't have the security that comes when the country is in charge of its public finances.
You're taking a lot of money out of the pockets of some of the most vulnerable people in this country, disabled people, through PIP reductions and through ESA reductions. Those are the people who can least afford to pay the sacrifice, those with the weakest shoulders, if you like, and you're changing the rules deliberately to hit them. Is that really your priority?
Well, I don't accept that at all. You know, we are increasing
which
spending.
bit don't you accept?
Well, first, we are increasing spending on disabled people, and the most disabled in our country get higher payments than they did under the last Labour government. So we're increasing the support we provide for disabled people. And by the way, we're also...
640,000 people will be affected by PIP reductions by the end of this Parliament.
The personal independence payments were introduced by this government to give those who really needed help, more support. By the way,
but they're getting less.
Well, hold on, we're also giving more support to people with mental health conditions, which didn't happen before. Now, when you've got a benefit like that, you have to make sure that it's properly managed so the money goes to those who need it most. That budget is going up, and what we're saying and what Ian Duncan Smith has announced is that we have to look at some of the way the points are awarded to make sure that in a rising budget, it goes to those who are most vulnerable,
according to your own government's figures, you're saving £1.2 billion by cutting payments to disabled people.
Yeah, well, hold on. The budget is going up. So it's
well,
not,
it
won't be going up as much as was forecast. That's because we're taking action. But, you know, controlling welfare bills is part of what you need to do if you are a secure country able to confront the problems in the world. And let me tell you,
if this all happens at the same time as you're raising thresholds to help middle-class taxpayers, it's going to seem a very, very callous set of priorities.
Well, as I say, we are providing more support to disabled people. And, yes, we back working people. Times are tough. You know, the fiscal situation is a difficult one because of what's going on in the world, because all Western countries, including our own, are not productive enough. But we can take action by making our economy more competitive, making our country better skilled, investing in the roads and the railways and the like that were not invested in before.
What about some of the other ways you could raise money if you chose to? At the moment, because of world oil prices, petrol's very cheap. Do you think motorists could have the shoulders to take a bit of taxation from you?
Well, look, I'll set out the decisions on duties like fuel duty in the budget.
It's just a friendly question.
It's a very friendly question, but it wouldn't be a very friendly response if I started spelling out my budget on the Andrew Marr programme. I think I would be summoned the next day correctly to the House of Commons. But look, I'll set out the tax rates in the budget. On fuel duty, you know, we had a manifesto commitment there, and we've penciled in fuel duty plans going forward. But what I would say is every time we can help our economy more competitive, we do. That's why we've cut business taxes. It's why we've helped working people by raising the personal allowance. You know, we're always
and you're going to carry on doing that. You've said that you're going to carry on doing that.
We have a very clear manifesto commitment. A promise we made to the British people that we would raise the personal allowance to £12,500. It's going to £11,000 in just a couple of weeks. To raise the high rate threshold to £50,000 so people on middle incomes weren't caught in the higher bands of tax. We will deliver on the manifesto, but of course in each judgment you make at a budget, you've got to see what money you've got available and what you can afford to do, and the truth is these are difficult economic times.
So we shouldn't be looking for tax cuts this time round?
Well, as I say, wait for the budget. What you'll see in the budget is a government absolutely determined to confront Britain's long-standing problems with its productivity, to make Britain more secure in the face of a difficult world economy. And look at our record. You know, we took difficult decisions. You asked me over many years perfectly legitimate questions about whether the judgments would turn out to be the right ones. Britain today has the fastest growing economy in the Western world. But we can stay number one, but only if we get ahead of the curve, redouble our efforts, make Britain fit for the future.
Meanwhile, you haven't been able to pay off the deficit as you'd promised. You've broken your own welfare cap, and you've made a numerous series of U-turns on everything from the Google tax to pensions to whatever it might be. It's a pretty ropey record at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I don't accept that at all. Even in the space of the last year, we've introduced a national living wage, an apprenticeship levy to skill up millions of Britons who don't have the right skills at the moment. We're undertaking
on the big picture, you didn't eliminate the deficit.
Well, on the big
because you didn't get the growth you thought you were going to get.
The big picture is people look at Britain and they see a country getting its act together and putting its house in order. And if you look at what we do as a government, you know, I think we take big, radical reforming steps. And yeah, we've got a small majority. So do we win every vote? No, we don't. But you can do two things in the face of that. You can either shut up shop and do nothing. That is not me as a politician, right? If people want a politician who's just going to sit here and blather away and not actually do anything and then get someone else, you know, what I'm interested in doing is making the real lasting changes to improve the living standards of working people in this country.
Do you regret praising the sweetheart deal with Google?
Look, I was faced with a situation when I became Chancellor where we were not raising any money from this company. Now we are raising money from Google, and indeed, so I read from Facebook and the like. And I think that is a success. Now, of course, people want more money to be raised from those companies. I understand that, but we've introduced the tax changes that will make that happen.
But
and
other
they never
happened.
happened. The people who criticise me, or, you know, often Labour politicians, they sat in chairs like this for 13 years, did absolutely nothing. And I think the steps we've taken will make sure that our tax system is fit for the modern age when, you know, frankly, The internet, the global trading system is vastly different than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and our tax system needs to change, and it is changing.
Now, you have talked about this being an unstable and dangerous world at the moment, possibly on the edge of another financial crisis, so people are quite worried about that. And there's a series of threats around the world that you have outlined, lower than expected Chinese growth, what's going on in the Middle East and so forth. But one of those threats is Brexit. Do you still think it was a brilliant idea to hold a referendum?
I think it's absolutely right for Britain to confront these big questions about its future. And in this case, to resolve that decades-long ambiguity about our relationship with the European Union. And for me, what's always made Britain great is that we're an outward-looking, free-trading country that engages with the world, that shapes our planet and its destiny. I am not for us pulling up the drawbridge, unilaterally withdrawing. And I hear people, saying, Andrew, I hear people saying, I want Britain to be like Switzerland, I want Britain to be like Norway, I want Britain to be like Canada. You know what? I want Britain to be like Great Britain, engaged in the world, championing free trade, not withdrawing from Europe, but shaping Europe to our national interest.
I've watched you going around the world, sort of selling Britain, as it were, and you go to America, you go to China, because those are still the two parts of the world economy that are growing. Europe is flat on its back. We look across Europe, we see a rise in political extremism, we see boundaries going back, barbed wire going back up again, we see the Eurozone in meltdown, and then we're told that it's safer to stay shackled to that than it is to get out. That seems to a lot of people completely barking, frankly.
Well, look, I'm all for...
Let's talk about the risks of staying in.
I'm all for Britain connecting itself to China, to North America, to Brazil and the like. I'm all for this. We don't do enough of that. But we have to recognise that we are part of the European continent. 50% of our exports...
We're not actually part of the European continent. We're off it. We're off it.
Well, I think you ask most school children which continent is the United Kingdom in, and they'll say Europe.
It's an island.
And it is indeed an island. But we've learned to our cost over many centuries that we are deeply affected by what happens just across the English Channel. And, if you look at Britain...
And it's going very, very badly at the moment.
It's, of course, for all Western democracies at the moment, there are lots of challenges and populist movements and so on. What is the best response to that? In my view, it is to have a sober and serious assessment of the facts. That's what the British people want. I've been the country's finance minister for the last 6 years. You take a serious assessment of the evidence, and an exit from the European Union would create an economic shock that would cost jobs, increase prices, damage living standards, and it would represent this big leap in the dark. Well, there's a bigger question as well about who do we want to be as a nation.
Isn't that rather unoptimistic?
It's difficult to think of any country in the world that has had a greater influence on the history of the world than the United Kingdom. And are we really going to be the people who say, there's the big table, we're walking away from it?
Well,